Goldman. I'd now like to welcome Vivian Pourgeot to the lectern here. Thank you, Vivian.
Thanks, June. Thanks very much for agreeing to convene this. It's great to have you doing this. My name is Vivian Pourgeot, and I'm with Jews Against the Occupation Sydney. I've been active as a Jew for over 20 years in actions for Palestinian rights in various forms, whether in Women in Black, Shalom Salam, and now in Jews Against the Occupation. I grew up in New Zealand. My parents were refugees from Prague. They got out of Prague the day the Nazis marched in, and I grew up very much as a secular Jew. I had no religious upbringing at all, but I knew I was a Jew, and that was always the case. And to me, I draw my sense of that from what Isaac Deutscher called the non-Jewish Jew. That is, those Jews who were not specifically religious, but were able to use the standpoint and historical experience of being a Jew to look with maybe a wider perspective and discover things. And so for me that means being critical, it means being rational, it means being internationalist, and also with a strong sense for social justice. And that's very strong. So I stand on my ground as a Jew in doing this. And I claim a membership of the tribe. I will not let others say that I am a non-Jew simply because they want to define Jews in a much more narrow way than I understand our traditions to come from. And that's partly what I am affirming here in doing this work. I'd like to take a rather different tack from what other people have done and reflect a bit on the reasons we are having this workshop here and not within the Pale of LimmudX. For those of you who may remember, the Pale was where Jews were confined, and it seems very tragic that there is a self-confinement going on here. What is this mishigas? What is this craziness? What is happening here that we are excluded in this way? And what is, we know it's fear. Why is it that, the very name of our book, Beyond Tribal Loyalties, why is that such a threat? And it's always mobilizing people's fears, mobilizing our tragic history in a totally rotten way, to stop moving forward, to stop learning the correct lessons from these kind of experiences, to continue to see anti-Semitism under the bed, and this chronic fear that's chronically nourished. And, even in those who, support us in some ways, people, there's this question of even associating with people. For instance, I was in a march on 15th of May to mark Al-Nakba, and apparently in this march was some old Nazi in the march as well. And how many times have I heard reflected back to me, you were marching with that Nazi, so that is the view that you hold, those similar views. What kind of thinking is that? It is just rotten, and it's tragic that we're infected with this kind of crap. And it's solid crap, and those of us who think differently have to begin to think how we can, how we can mobilize ourselves to be a different kind of influence in the community. I don't think we should walk away. I think that's really irresponsible. I think we have a responsibility here, because we can understand some of the roots of this stuff. We can understand why the people are susceptible to this stuff with some kind of compassion. But that gives us greater responsibility, which is why I do this work as a Jew very much. Even people call us Nazis. Like coming to a workshop like this is going to a workshop led by Nazis and David Irving. I don't understand it at all. It's just awful. There's a total disconnect with the realities on the ground. As has been described, people when they go on their journeys, they find, it's very different from what I have been told. And it's this chronic imprisonment of our minds and hearts and spirits to feed this kind of movement. And yet, in many ways, I would consider myself and our friends, greater friends of Israel, because this Israel, with this kind of support, is not going to survive. It's not going to survive. It's rotten. It can't survive. It can only survive on a basis of meeting and being with the Palestinians on an equal basis. That's the only way. Whether it's one state, two state, whatever it is, it's got to be on that basis. And there's no other future really possible. And that's the kind of future I'm working for. The difficulty is that there's, with all this fear and this hate, and underlying it, a certain sense of despair. Despair that we can ever be part of humanity, that we have to be in this survivalist, fear-ridden state all the time, that that's the only way, and sort of somehow assuming that if we've got enough guns, it'll be okay. And, that's how can we be a voice for peace? How can we be a force for peace if these are the drivers of what we're doing? And if we think of the opposites, there's faith, the opposite of despair, and hope, and love, which is, there was a Jew who said something about these things. And I think these are much more drivers towards a peaceful solution, and much more affirming of our humanity. The other is so denying of our humanity. And I just want to work with that light. I'd also like to say that in terms of what's different about us, maybe we have more hope. We have hope for a better world. And from those of us who stay locked into the rigidities. And I think hope, the capacity to retain hope and the vision of what human beings can be is really important.
Thank you very much. Now, our final speaker is Peter Slezak, and then after that, we'll take a deep breath and there'll be questions.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming, everybody. One of the first things that occurs to me, you may wonder, as you can see now, most of the
Louder.
everybody's spoken now except for me. You can see what a scary bunch we are. And the question you have to ask yourself is, a question raised by some of the others, is why this panel was excluded. We are dangerous, and we're dangerous for a very important reason. We're asking you to think for yourselves, and we're asking the Jewish community to confront certain things that are very uncomfortable for them. And that's very subversive, and I think the people that prevent not only us but visitors who come from overseas from speaking, they understand that this is unsettling, and it shatters some of the myths that they want to preserve. So I think this is the important question. And one of the central features of this is the question of what it is to be Jewish and what responsibilities that carries. And we're supposed to have learned certain lessons. Vivian and others have mentioned this. Personally, I don't want to go too much into my own details, they're in my piece, but I grew up in Sydney. My parents were not religious and they were Zionist, and so it was easy for me. I thought I was missing out on summer camp. Basically, I wasn't sent to Havanim and Beitar and the brainwashing that those Zionist camps involve. So it was sort of easy for me, but it's not easy for many others, and that's the dangerous thing, that they may have to rethink a lot of the prejudices, and one of them is the lessons we're supposed to have learned from the Holocaust. I know my Jewish friends, when I've spoken publicly and mentioned my Holocaust experience, they're enormously angry with that, and I can't really understand it. This is supposed to be one of the issues that drives Jews and the lessons we're supposed to have learned. And as far as I can see, we learned a different lesson from what the majority of the Jewish community have learned. My mother was in Auschwitz, my father was in camps in Ukraine and elsewhere. And I learned never again, but it meant never again to anybody. Oppression, discrimination, racism. Somehow I learned the lesson that we suffered as Jews from that, and the idea was, well, that's terrible. And you can understand why all of us, I think, feel that this is something which we now have to stand up against when we're now the oppressors and we're now the ones committing the racism against the Palestinians. So there are all these questions, and I have to say, while I'm thinking of this, I was recently privileged to go on a tour to Palestine with Lisa Arnold here and FIDA. And it was my first time. I'd been in Israel before, but I'd never been in Palestine. And one of the shocking things about that is to see, of course, how all of the stereotypes and the myths that we're encouraged to believe are all false. What Israel is doing there is not in defence of Israel, it's rubbish. They're basically committing the most horrible violations of international law and human rights throughout the West Bank. And the interesting thing, one of the things that we learned there was that the Israelis themselves don't know this, not just the Jews in the diaspora. So I come to one of the points I was going to make. I've got a whole list of things. Apart from my personal biography, which I'm less interested in talking about, you can read about it, it's the question of what is our responsibility as Jews. And one of the other lessons from the Holocaust was we held in contempt the people who said, the Germans in particular, who said they didn't know what was going on. Many of them probably didn't know. Mind you, I'm just repeating a point that Amira Haas, the Israeli journalist, makes very often. She said she learned that from her mother, who was a victim of the Holocaust. Our job is to go and tell the Jewish community what I've seen and what you can find out easily enough, and they can't say they don't know. We have to go around and make sure. Now, they find it very difficult to confront this. It is confronting. In a certain kind of, I wouldn't say innocence, but in a certain sense, they really have the faintest idea. I just talked to a Jewish friend the other day. They have no idea where the wall goes. They always repeat the stupid lie that it's defending them, Israel against terrorism. It's not true. And they repeat all this rubbish. Our responsibility is to talk to the Jewish community. Our efforts to do it at this conference, you can see, have been unsuccessful, except for the good fortune that you've come along to hear. And I was going to say that our job is to go out to the rest of the Jewish community to talk about these things. One of the other things in the sort of random schools I just made on the paper is the ways in which the Jewish community reacts, which has also been mentioned here. When we try to speak out, we're flabbergasted at the responses we get. Can you imagine, even take the worst crime, the so-called red line, which is BDS. You know, you've watched what's been the reaction of the Jewish community to this. They're explicitly calling people who support BDS Nazis, and they compare it to the Kauft nicht by Juden, and in the New York Times and elsewhere. This is the most disgusting and inexplicable slur on people who, after all, if you read the literature and you know what we're standing for human rights, international law, and observing the Palestinians and their rights. Now, explain to yourself why the Jewish community, and mind you, I should say, it's not just the leaders that are coming out spewing this shit. Why don't the rest of the Jewish community rise up and say this is outrageous and it shouldn't be tolerated? Whatever you may think of BDS, even if you hate it, you shouldn't tolerate this kind of dismissal. There's a reason for it. It's the reason we're not permitted at this conference. The moment you notice that the people on the other side are reasonable and decent and stand for decent principles, then of course, as I started saying, we're very dangerous because the whole thing will crumble. And maybe we'll make peace with the Palestinians and give them their due as human beings and give them their rights, which is what we're all asking for. So I think that's the kind of danger that we pose. I've said just about everything I want to say.
Well, you've got another minute.
I've got another minute.
You don't have to use it.
No, I will use it. I said when I started, I'm a philosopher by training, and I usually have an hour to speak, but I can't speak anything less than an hour. Let me go back to my own background in this. When I was 12 years old, I was asked, it kind of indicates to you why it was easy for me and why it is harder for others. I had a very orthodox Jewish friend, and I was 12 years old, and I still remember very clearly the moment. He asked me, am I a Zionist? And I had to mumble something because I was embarrassed. I didn't know what it meant. I know the answer now. The answer is no. And that tells you the kind of background that I was fortunate to get, because I didn't have to undo, as many others here have spoken, had to undo a lot of baggage. I don't want to underestimate the difficulty of that. I see it in my friends. Some of my friends have broken the friendship with me after a very long time. They can't cope with it. It's not through any meaningful discussion. It's simply the psychological difficulty. Now, what we have to try to do, as several others have said, is to try and engage in the best way we can. We're trying very hard to do it. It's great that this is an occasion where we can have a go at that. Some of you, I never know in this kind of audience. Usually we're speaking to the converted. And that's one of the difficulties. A few people are nodding, so I know you're on side. She's not good. The difficulty is to speak to the others in a way that we can hear one another and listen to each other's concerns. We share, after all, a lot of sympathy for the people that think that Jews are all, victimised, and they're all, everybody's an anti-Semite, and there's plenty out there. One doesn't have to deny that. We have to listen to each other, and that's the hardest part. So I think I'll wind up. Thank you.
Peter, have we not got a chair for you?
I'm fine.
We've come to you've had the pleasure and the opportunity to listen. Now it's your opportunity to ask questions. The usual methods are going to apply. You raise your hand. I try and see people as fairly and as broadly as I can. Please indicate to whom the question is addressed, whether it's to one person or to more. And I've been asked by Larry Stillman, who is been filming the session so far, if you would please indicate whether or not you're willing to be filmed. You won't be filmed unless you want to be, unless you're willing to be. This is going to be slightly awkward, but that's that I think it's worth a try. Okay, question. One at the back. Are you willing to be filmed? Yes. Okay.
Hi. Sorry, Peter, you just sat down. You mentioned in your brief speech that you were surprised that Jews in Israel don't know what's going on as well. Could you speak to that?
I'll say a couple of quick... I get that from two things. I've got my mother's closest family are in Israel, in Tel Aviv, in Nahariya, and I visited my cousin there. But I'm actually quoting from Yehuda Shaul, who is well known in Israel. He's an Orthodox Jew, wears a yarmulke. He's one of the founders of Breaking the Silence. These are IDF soldiers who are, there's a website, they give these very moving, really heartbreaking testimonies of what they realise after they've done stuff in the West Bank, in Hebron. These are Jewish boys, and one of them reports how when his family saw the video a year later after he left the army, how he broke down, had to go to the bathroom and cried his eyes out. They're saying, I'm quoting them, this is what I learned from this wonderful visit. They are speaking out because their mothers don't know what they're doing in Hebron. They don't, and he puts it like this, I'm quoting verbatim, he says, you want an occupation, we're going to tell you what it costs you morally. Now he's saying this, and I explicitly asked him, we had an evening with Yehuda Shaul, and then we went on a bus tour in the South Hebron Hills. So they're saying that their parents don't know what they're doing, and of course they don't know, and he's got some nightmarish stories to tell. They are basically terrorising innocent Palestinians, the vast majority of whom do non-violent, peaceful resistance. So that's the story that you're asking.